Hello everyone, welcome to our UGC NET Paper-I series. In today's lecture, we are starting Unit 1, Teaching Aptitude, and our first topic is one of the most important topics of the entire unit, teaching, its concept, objectives, levels, characteristics, and basic requirements. This topic is very important because in Paper 1, questions are not only asked directly from definitions, many questions are conceptual. For example, the exam may ask, at which level of teaching is problem-solving emphasized? Or, which level of teaching is associated with rote memory? Or, which of the following is a basic requirement of effective teaching? So, our goal today is not only to remember points, but to understand the logic behind them. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to explain what teaching means, identify the main objectives of teaching, differentiate between memory level, understanding level, and reflective level of teaching, and finally explain the characteristics and basic requirements of effective teaching. Let us begin. Section 1. Meaning and concept of teaching. When we hear the word teaching, many people immediately imagine a teacher standing in front of a classroom, writing on the board, explaining a topic, and students listening quietly. But teaching is much more than that. Teaching is not simply speaking. Teaching is not simply giving notes. Teaching is not simply completing the syllabus. Teaching is a purposeful activity that helps learners learn. In simple words, teaching is the process of creating conditions in which learning can take place. The most important point is this. The final aim of teaching is learning. If a teacher has spoken for 1 hour, but the students have not understood anything, then the teaching process is incomplete. On the other hand, if the teacher uses simple language, relevant examples, questions, activities, and feedback, and students are able to understand, apply, and think independently, then teaching has become effective. Teaching involves several elements. First, there is the teacher who plans, guides, explains, motivates, and evaluates. Second, there is the learner who receives, processes, questions, and applies knowledge. Third, there is the content, which is the subject matter. Fourth, there is the method, meaning how the teacher teaches. Fifth, there is the environment, meaning classroom atmosphere, facilities, motivation, and discipline. Finally, there is evaluation, through which we check whether learning has actually taken place. So, teaching is a planned interaction between teacher, learner, and content with the purpose of producing desirable changes in the learner. These desirable changes may be of different types. A student may gain knowledge, develop understanding, learn a skill, change an attitude, improve reasoning ability, develop values, become more confident, or become able to solve problems. Therefore, teaching is connected with knowledge, behavior, skills, attitudes, and values. A very important phrase for NET aspirants is, teaching is a purposeful direction and management of the learning process. It means teaching has a definite goal. A good teacher does not enter the class randomly. A good teacher asks, what should students learn today? What prior knowledge do they have? Which examples will help them? Which method should I use? How will I know whether they have understood? Teaching is also a skillful application of knowledge, experience, and scientific principles. This is why teaching is both an art and a science. It is a science because it uses principles of psychology, learning, motivation, classroom management, and evaluation. It is an art because every teacher needs creativity, communication, expression, empathy, and human understanding. Let us take a simple example. Suppose you are teaching the concept of democracy. At a basic level, you may define democracy as government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But if students only memorize the definition, teaching has remained at a lower level. If you explain elections, representation, rights, duties, and participation, students begin to understand. If you ask them to analyze whether a particular classroom decision was democratic or not, they begin to think reflectively. This is the difference between simply delivering information and actually teaching. So teaching is a dynamic process. It changes according to learner, subject level, objective, method, and situation. Section 2. Teaching, learning, instruction, and training. Before moving further, let us quickly distinguish teaching from related terms. Learning is the change that occurs in the learner. It may be a change in knowledge, behavior, understanding, attitude, or skill. Teaching is the process used to bring about learning. Instruction is more specific. It is the organized presentation of content, usually in a formal setting. For example, explaining a formula, showing a diagram, or giving step-by-step directions. Training is usually skill-based. For example, training a student to use laboratory equipment, training teachers in micro-teaching, or training someone to operate software. Education is broader than all these. Education includes teaching, learning, training, values, personality development, social development, and preparation for life. For UGC NET, remember this: teaching is related to education, learning, instruction, and training, but it is not exactly identical to any one of them. Section 3. Objectives of teaching. Now let us discuss the objectives of teaching. An objective means the intended result. In teaching, an objective answers the question: what should the learner be able to know, feel, or do after instruction? A good teaching objective should be clear, specific, outcome-based, and measurable. For example, students will understand teaching aptitude is a broad statement, but students will be able to differentiate memory level, understanding level, and reflective level of teaching is a better objective because it tells us exactly what students should be able to do. The objectives of teaching can be discussed in two ways: general objectives and instructional objectives. The general objectives of teaching include developing knowledge, understanding, reasoning, values, skills, personality, social adjustment, creativity, and problem-solving ability. Teaching also prepares learners for life, citizenship, employment, and self-learning. But in examination, one of the most important classifications of objectives comes from Bloom's taxonomy. According to this classification, learning objectives are usually grouped into three domains: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. The cognitive domain is related to knowledge and intellectual abilities. It includes remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. When a student defines, explains, compares, applies a formula, analyzes a situation, or creates an answer, the cognitive domain is involved. The affective domain is related to feelings, attitudes, interests, values, and appreciation. For example, developing respect for diversity, valuing truth, showing interest in research, developing scientific temper, or becoming sensitive to social issues. The psychomotor domain is related to physical and motor skills. For example, operating a microscope, drawing a map, conducting an experiment, typing, using a tool, or performing a laboratory procedure. A good teacher tries to address all three domains. In higher education, we often focus heavily on the cognitive domain, but effective teaching also develops attitudes and skills. Let us take one example from teaching aptitude itself. If I ask you, name the three levels of teaching, that is cognitive, remembering. If I ask, explain the difference between memory level and reflective level, that is cognitive, understanding and analysis. If I ask, design a teaching strategy for slow learners, that is application and creation. If I ask you to develop respect for learner differences, that involves the affective domain. If I ask a trainee teacher to demonstrate questioning skills in a micro-teaching session, that involves the psychomotor domain also. So, teaching objectives should not remain limited to information. They should move learners from knowing to understanding, from understanding to application, from application to analysis, and finally towards independent and creative thinking. Section 4. Levels of Teaching. Overview. Now we come to the core part of today's lecture, levels of teaching. In UGC NET Paper-I, 3 levels are specifically mentioned: memory level, understanding level, and reflective level. Morris L. Biggie described these as the least thoughtful, and most thoughtful levels, respectively. Think of these levels as a teaching pyramid. At the base, we have memory level. Here, the focus is on remembering facts. In the middle, we have understanding level. Here, the focus is on understanding relationships, principles, and meanings. At the top, we have reflective level. Here, the focus is on problem solving, critical thinking, and original thinking. All 3 levels have their place. We should not say memory level is useless. Without memory, understanding is difficult. Without understanding, reflection is weak. But if teaching stops only at memory, it becomes rote learning. A good teacher gradually takes students from memory to understanding and from understanding to reflection. Let us now study each level in detail. Section 5. Memory level of teaching. The memory level of teaching is the first and lowest level of teaching. It is also called the least thoughtful level. The main proponent associated with this level is Herbart. At this level, the learner mainly memorizes facts, terms, definitions, formulas, dates, names, rules, and information. The main processes are learning, retention, and reproduction. The student learns the material, retains it in memory, and reproduces it when required. For example, if I ask, who is the main proponent of memory level of teaching? And the answer is Herbart, this is memory level. If I ask, what are the 3 domains of Bloom's taxonomy? And you say cognitive, affective, and psychomotor, this is memory level. The teaching-learning process at this level is often linked with the stimulus-response model. The teacher gives information, asks questions, gives reinforcement, and expects correct responses. Repetition, drill, practice, review, and revision are common methods. At memory level, the teacher's role is very active. The teacher decides the content, method, sequence, questions, and evaluation. The learner's role is comparatively passive. The learner listens, repeats, memorizes, and reproduces. The subject matter at memory level is usually simple, structured, definite, and observable. The teacher may use charts, maps, pictures, models, audio-visual aids, and repeated questioning to help students remember. Evaluation at memory level focuses on recall and recognition. For example, multiple choice questions, matching questions, short answers, definitions, fill in the blanks, and oral questioning are common. The main objective is to provide basic knowledge and factual information. This level is especially useful when students are beginners or when the topic requires basic facts before higher thinking. For example, before understanding Bloom's taxonomy, students must first remember the names of the domains. Before solving a mathematical problem, students must remember formulas. Before analyzing a theory, students must remember key terms. But memory level also has limitations. If the teacher only promotes memorization, students may become dependent on rote learning. They may reproduce definitions, but fail to explain, apply, or analyze. That is why memory level is necessary, but not sufficient. For the exam, remember the key words of memory level: Herbart, rote learning, factual knowledge, repetition, drill, recall, recognition, teacher-centered, passive learner, least thoughtful. Section 6. Understanding level of teaching. The second level is the understanding level of teaching. The main proponent associated with this level is Morrison. It is also called the thoughtful level. Understanding level goes beyond memorization. Here, students do not simply remember facts, they understand meanings, relationships, principles, and applications. It is sometimes described as memory plus insight. At this level, the learner understands why something is true, how one idea is related to another, and how a principle can be used in a situation. Let us take an example. At memory level, a student says, teaching has 3 levels: memory, understanding, and reflective. At understanding level, the student explains, memory level focuses on recall, understanding level focuses on meaning and relationship, and reflective level focuses on problem solving. This is a higher level because the student is now able to compare and explain. The objectives of understanding level include interpretation, exemplification, classification, comparison, and inference. Students learn to grasp meaning, organize facts, understand principles, and apply generalizations to real-life situations. At this level, methods such as lecture cum demonstration, discussion, inductive-deductive method, explanation, and exemplification are useful. The teacher uses examples and non-examples. For example, while teaching effective teaching, the teacher may give an example of clear instruction and a non-example of confusing instruction. Teaching aids like models, charts, flashcards, and pictures help students comprehend concepts better. At understanding level, the classroom becomes more active than memory level. The teacher still plays a significant role, but learners are more involved. The teacher presents the learning material, creates interest, and arranges content in a meaningful sequence. The learner listens, thinks, asks questions, connects ideas, and tries to understand. Evaluation at this level is broader than simple recall. It may include oral tests, written tests, essay-type questions, short explanations, application questions, and practical examples. The teacher may ask, why is teaching considered both an art and a science? Or compare memory level and understanding level. Such questions require understanding, not only memorization. The merit of understanding level is that students do not simply cram. They develop command over the subject. They learn to organize knowledge and relate new knowledge with previous knowledge. But there are limitations also. understanding level may still remain subject-centered. It may focus on mastery of content more than problem solving. The learner is active, but the structure is still largely decided by the teacher. For the exam, remember these keywords: Morrison, memory plus insight, thoughtful level, mastery of subject, relationships among facts, principles, examples, explanation, discussion, active learner, comprehension, and application. Section 7. Reflective level of teaching. Now we come to the highest level, the reflective level of teaching. The main proponent associated with this level is Hunt. It is called the most thoughtful level and also the introspective level. Reflective level is problem-centered. Here, the learner is not only expected to remember or understand, but to think deeply, analyze situations, solve problems, and create new ideas. At this level, students face real or realistic problems. They identify the problem, define it, analyze it, collect information, consider alternatives, and propose a solution. This level develops critical thinking, original thinking, creativity, reasoning, and independent judgment. Let us take an example. Suppose the topic is large classroom teaching. At memory level, students may define large classroom teaching. At understanding level, they may explain its advantages and disadvantages. At reflective level, they may be given a problem. You have 120 students in a classroom with limited resources. How will you make teaching interactive? Now, students must think, design, justify, and solve. At reflective level, the classroom environment should be open and independent. Students should feel free to ask questions, challenge ideas, explore alternatives, and express opinions. The teacher does not force knowledge on students. Instead, the teacher becomes a democratic guide and facilitator. The role of the learner becomes primary. The learner is active, motivated, imaginative, and innovative. The teacher's role becomes secondary but very important. The teacher creates the situation, guides inquiry, gives feedback, and encourages reflection. Evaluation at reflective level cannot be limited to simple MCQs. Essay-type tests, problem-solving tasks, project work, case studies, attitude assessment, involvement, and reasoning-based answers are more suitable. Reflective level is especially suitable for higher classes, higher education, and mature learners. It is useful for developing research aptitude, critical thinking, and independent learning, but it may not be suitable for very young children or learners who do not yet have the required foundation. Also, the content may not always be as pre-planned and systematic as in memory or understanding level, because reflective teaching often begins from problems and inquiry. For UGC NET, remember these keywords: Hunt, introspective level, highest level, most thoughtful, problem-solving, open and independent classroom, learner-centered, democratic teacher, creativity, critical thinking, real-life problems. A very easy way to remember all three levels is this. Memory level asks, what is it? Understanding level asks, why and how is it so? Reflective level asks, what can be done with this knowledge in a real problem situation? Section 8. Quick comparison of the three levels. Let us revise the three levels in a compact way. Memory level is associated with Herbart. It is least thoughtful. It focuses on facts, recall, rote learning, and reproduction. The teacher is dominant and the learner is mostly passive. Understanding level is associated with Morrison. It is thoughtful. It focuses on meaning, relationships, principles, generalizations, and application. The teacher organizes content and the learner becomes more active. Reflective level is associated with Hunt. It is most thoughtful. It focuses on problem solving, critical thinking, reasoning, creativity, and independent judgment. The learner occupies the central position and the teacher acts as a democratic facilitator. In the examination, if you see words like recall, recognition, drill, repetition, memorization, think of memory level. If you see words like insight, comprehension, relationship, principles, examples, generalization, think of understanding level. If you see words like problem solving, critical thinking, open classroom, independent thinking, creativity, think of reflective level. Section 9. Characteristics or nature of teaching. Now let us discuss the characteristics of teaching. First, teaching is a purposeful activity. It has clear objectives. A teacher teaches with a goal in mind. Second, teaching takes place at different levels. It can be memory level, understanding level, or reflective level depending on the learner and objective. Third, teaching takes place in a dynamic environment. A classroom is not static. Students differ in intelligence, motivation, background, language, confidence, learning styles, and interest. Therefore, teaching methods must change according to situation. Fourth, teaching is related to education, learning, instruction, and training. It is part of the broader educational process. Fifth, teaching is an intellectual activity. A teacher must think, plan, organize, explain, analyze, evaluate, and reflect. Sixth, teaching is both an art and a science. It is a science because it is based on principles of learning, psychology, evaluation, and communication. It is an art because it requires creativity, expression, emotional intelligence, and human relationship. Seventh, teaching is an interactive process. It involves communication between teacher and learner. Even when a teacher gives a lecture, effective teaching requires feedback, questions, examples, and response. Eighth, teaching is a continuous process. A teacher keeps learning, planning, teaching, evaluating, and improving. Ninth, teaching is a social service. Education helps in the development of society, and teachers contribute to nation building. 10th, teaching is a profession. It requires knowledge, training, skills, ethics, responsibility, and continuous professional development. 11th, teaching has a degree of autonomy. Teachers make decisions regarding methods, examples, classroom strategies, assessment techniques, and learning activities. 12th, teaching is meant to bring desirable change in the learner. This change may be cognitive, affective, or psychomotor. So, if a question asks about the nature or characteristics of teaching, remember: purposeful, dynamic, intellectual, interactive, continuous, professional, social, art, and science, linked with learning and directed towards change. Section 10. Basic requirements of effective teaching. Now let us come to the final part of today's lecture. Basic requirements of teaching, or more specifically, effective teaching. A person may have knowledge, but that does not automatically make him or her an effective teacher. Effective teaching requires planning, clarity, communication, organization, motivation, interaction, evaluation, and feedback. One important set of effective teaching behaviors includes lesson clarity, instructional variety, teacher task orientation, learner engagement, and student success rate. Let us understand these one by one. Lesson clarity means the teacher explains ideas clearly and in a step-by-step manner. The language should be simple, the sequence should be logical, and distractions should be minimized. A teacher should begin with an overview and end with a summary. Instructional variety means using different teaching tools, examples, activities, questions, voice modulation, gestures, visuals, and learning resources. If teaching is monotonous, students lose attention. Variety keeps learning alive. Teacher task orientation means using classroom time effectively. A good teacher handles interruptions quickly, organizes material, avoids unnecessary delays, and keeps the class focused on learning. Engagement in the learning process means students should not remain passive. They should think, answer, ask, discuss, write, solve, observe, or perform. Engagement is essential for deep learning. Student success rate means students should be given tasks that are challenging but achievable. If the task is too easy, there is no growth. If it is too difficult, students become frustrated. Effective teaching keeps learners moving successfully from known to unknown, simple to complex, and concrete to abstract. Apart from these, effective teaching also requires some helpful behaviors. A good teacher uses student ideas and contributions. When students answer, the teacher should not ignore them. The teacher may acknowledge, modify, compare, summarize, or extend their responses. A good teacher uses structuring. This means telling students what is coming, connecting new content with previous learning, and summarizing what has been taught. A good teacher uses questioning. Questions should not be only factual. They should also include process questions, open questions, divergent questions, and problem-solving questions. A good teacher uses probing. If a student gives a partial answer, the teacher asks, "Can you explain further? Why do you think so? Can you give an example?" This helps students elaborate. A good teacher has positive teacher affect. This includes enthusiasm, warmth, eye contact, movement, voice variation, and encouraging behavior. Teaching is not only intellectual, it is also emotional and social. Now let us list some other basic requirements. The first requirement is command over the subject. A teacher must know the content well. The second requirement is knowledge of learners. A teacher must understand learners' previous knowledge, interest, ability, motivation, and individual differences. The third requirement is clear objectives. Without objectives, teaching becomes directionless. The fourth requirement is proper planning. A teacher should plan content, examples, questions, activities, teaching aids, and evaluation. The fifth requirement is communication skill. A teacher must use clear language, proper voice, meaningful gestures, and suitable examples. The sixth requirement is use of teaching aids and support material. Charts, models, slides, diagrams, videos, and demonstrations help make abstract concepts concrete. The seventh requirement is motivation. Students learn better when they see value in the topic. The eighth requirement is feedback and evaluation. Feedback tells both teacher and learner what has been achieved and what still needs improvement. The ninth requirement is classroom management. Discipline does not mean fear. It means creating a learning environment where students feel safe, focused, and involved. The 10th requirement is flexibility. A teacher must be ready to change method if students are not understanding. The 11th requirement is reflective practice. After every class, a good teacher asks, what worked, what did not work, how can I improve? So, effective teaching requires clarity, variety, task orientation, engagement, success rate, subject mastery, planning, communication, motivation, feedback, and respect for individual differences. Section 11. Exam-oriented recap. Let us now revise the most exam-oriented points from today's lecture. Teaching is a purposeful process directed towards learning. Teaching is not just information transfer, it creates conditions for learning. Teaching is both an art and a science. Teaching is interactive, dynamic, continuous, and professional. Teaching objectives can be classified into cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains. The three levels of teaching are memory, understanding, and reflective. Memory level is associated with Herbart. It focuses on recall, recognition, drill, repetition, and rote learning. Understanding level is associated with Morrison. It focuses on insight, comprehension, relationships, and principles. Reflective level is associated with Hunt. It focuses on problem solving, creativity, reasoning, and critical thinking. Morris L. Biggie described memory level as least thoughtful, understanding level as thoughtful, and reflective level as most thoughtful. Effective teaching requires lesson clarity, instructional variety, task orientation, student engagement, and student success rate. A teacher should use student ideas, structure the lesson, ask good questions, probe answers, and maintain a positive teacher-learner relationship.